So today we're looking at the charging and battery system on this 1999 Lexus ES300. But basically what was happening as I was driving, I saw that the battery light came on the dash, and I saw a couple other error lights was flashing, and then finally the vehicle just died. It would not restart. When you turn the key, there's absolutely nothing. So the battery was completely dead, had to get it towed back. So I've had this battery on a trickle charger for several days now, and it is now at a good 12.5, 13 volts. So the question is the alternator not putting out a charging voltage, or is a charging voltage being blocked due to a bad battery connection and not able to go back into the battery and charge it? So with an 11mm open-end wrench, you can just get to your battery connections. That's the ones that I have on my battery. So the first thing I notice is that if you look along the base of this terminal, there's a little bit of corrosion there, possibly. And if you look on the inside of this battery terminal, you can see that's not making a good connection. So that's possible that my alternator actually is charging, and that I should try and clean that up before doing anything else. So to get at this terminal, I'm just going to take a 12mm socket and remove this nut. This is a universal type clamp that I got from AutoZone. I might just buy another one if I can't clean that up. Then I'm just going to take a wire brush to the actual post on the battery and just a little bit of sandpaper just to go around, scuff it up. So if you follow the positive battery cable down, it's hard to see. I'm not going to take it all the way out, but there is another connection that should snake all the way over to the alternator, which is on the passenger side. So if your battery is not charging, the alternator very well could be bad, but you want to double check and make sure that it's not just a problem with the wiring getting the voltage from the alternator to the actual battery. So here's what we're going to do. On top of the starter is a plastic cover right here, and it's a little bit difficult, but it just kind of snaps off, and it's just covering a connection. So underneath that is a black and green wire, and it's got a nut that's holding it into a post, and that's where the voltage is coming out. So I'm going to take my multimeter. I am going to put it on resistance setting, because I'm going to measure the resistance from the positive battery cable all the way down to this post, and it should be very low, near zero. Alright, so I got wires a little all over the place, but I'm going to put my red lead onto the stud, and I'm going to reach over with the other lead and touch the battery clamp that goes onto the positive side. And the multimeter is telling me that it's around 0.4 ohms, which is very low resistance, which means that any voltage coming out of that regulator should be able to get to the battery without a problem. So I need to go ahead and take this alternator out. So before tackling the job of removing the alternator, just double check that the belt here is still relatively tight. There is an adjustment that's kind of hard to see, but there's an adjustment screw down here. So it is possible that the alternator works, but the belt is slipping. But my belt looks to be in pretty good shape, so I'm going to remove it and take it to AutoZone to get it tested. So this nut that holds on the charge cable is staring me right in the face. So that should be easy. I'm going to go ahead and do that first with a 10mm socket with an extension. I'm going to lift the radiator hose, go ahead and loosen that nut. One wire down. So right next to that connection is going to be another wire harness, and that should be able to pinch and slide out, although it's a little awkward to get at. And the locking tab for that connector just broke off because it's very brittle plastic, so be gentle. And the wire harness that the charge cable and that other plug go into, it looks like it's clipped to the side of the alternator. There's a little bracket that's held on there with a little nut and a stud. It's going to be difficult to get to the hardware, it looks like, so I'm going to try to unclip the plastic clip. So that's the easiest way to get to it, is to push the tab in and go under there with a flat blade screwdriver and twist it up. That wire harness is now off of the alternator. Assuming that I end up replacing this alternator, I'll be able to get to the nut and the bracket that hold that wire harness, and I'll be able to swap it over if the new one doesn't come with the same bracket. So this was the part that I was not looking forward to, which is getting access to the adjuster bolt that's underneath the alternator. Sometimes it's easier to take parts off that you don't need to, just to give yourself some more room. So the relay and fuse box right here, I'm going to take these two pieces of hardware off, and hopefully I can get some more room to get a wrench on the adjuster bolt. So the adjuster bolt that I'm trying to get to is right underneath that fuse box that I just moved, and you can see the bolt head right here. If you look at it from the side, there's a bolt going through the bracket, and it looks like it's going into another threaded block, and it's on a slider kind of channel on the bracket. And so I'm thinking that if you lefty-loosey this bolt, that should bring the alternator in towards this pivot bolt. It should pivot it down and relieve the tension off the belt. It uses a 12mm hex open-end wrench or socket if you can get a socket wrench in there. So I'm going to try that and see how it goes. So this is going to be my tool of choice. I've got my Hitachi cordless impact wrench. It's very low power. You don't need a lot of power, but it's just going to be easier than having to make a lot of small incremental turns to just slightly hold that trigger and back it out. I've got two wobble extensions which will help with getting the socket off angle. So I've got my socket with a 14mm hex head socket on it. That's pretty tight. You need to put a little bit of torque into it. And now I'm able to push that alternator down, and you can see how loose that belt is. So I'm going to gently slide the loose belt off of the alternator here. Really, they've got a hard refrigerant line right where the bolt needs to come out at. Alright, so I'm going to use my pry bar now. I'm hoping I can pry this guy out. Oh, even better, that bolt is not even fully encapsulated. This is just in a slot. This is hard to see, but I wanted to go ahead and make the narration here while I'm in action. You need to reach underneath the alternator here and pick it up and tilt it all the way up as much as you can. So my fingers are on the sliding block that adjuster bolt went into. There's actually a second bolt, hard to see here, but it actually goes into a bottom mount on that alternator. So you got to get a wrench under there somehow, or get your hands under there and see if you can back it out. That's the last piece of hardware. So the adjuster bolt, you can actually see where it was originally adjusted to based on the clean area of the threads. So when you put it back in, you're going to have to try and get a flashlight in there and watch, because you want the block to land in the same spot where the threads are clean. Those threads are clean because the block was covering it for the last 197,000 miles. So here was the block. It was oriented in the vehicle like this. The adjuster bolt went this way through that hole, and you just had to lefty-loosey and back this bolt all the way out. And that should free up the alternator on the last mount. So now it's just trying to figure out how to get it past all of these hoses. And the alternator is now out. So now I'm going to take this to AutoZone, see if they can test it and verify that it is in fact bad, and then I'll just get another one and reinstall. So the alternator failed the test at AutoZone, which is basically a little booth that they just put the alternator on a fixture, and they just tension a belt on here, and they're basically just running it at a certain RPM, measuring the voltage output, but it failed the test. Now I got my new alternator, but there are a couple brackets here that hold a wire harness on here, so just make sure you transfer any clips or any wire harness brackets over to the new one.